Fragrant Sticky Rice, a mythological story from the Tsou. This is a chapter from the book My Dear Ak'i, Please Don't Be Upset, authored by Faisu Mukunana, English translation published in 2021. This book is available from itascabooks.com. It was a long, long time ago when a young man, the father of two lovely kids, hiked deep into the mountains to find food for his family. Having heard there was a lot of Tsao, a kind of tasty Asian mountain yam, and told where to go, off he went, armed with a basket, a small hoe, and a scythe. Although he was physically fit, he felt tired and was short of breath due to the long and difficult mountain trails. He stuck his neck out to scan far ahead, hoping to get there as soon as possible. When there was no trail to walk on, he swung his scythe to clear the shrub. Finally, he arrived at the spot where there was a lot of Tsao. He began to dig. He dug up many Tsao tubers, and each and every one was huge. He put them in a basket, so many that in no time the basket was almost full. He thought, just a couple more, before he headed home. "Oh my, what a huge tuber!" he proclaimed, starting to dig up another. He continued digging and digging. There seemed no end in sight. The young man was someone who wouldn't stop until whatever he was doing was done. He wasn't done, so he kept at it until dusk arrived. Now his stomach was hungry, and he was exhausted. He made a fire and baked a tuber. After eating, he figured he'd dig up some more so he could show the outsized tubers to the villagers, who, no doubt, had never seen any so large. Excited, he asked himself, how big could this tuber be? Minutes later, he was sound asleep. He woke up and cried out, "Ah, it is already dawn!" He got up quickly and began working. But no matter how hard he put his back into it, he couldn't reach the other end of the especially big tuber. After 2 days of this, the portion of the tuber he could see so far would be more than he could handle in terms of lugging it back home. What should I do? He asked himself. His answer was to continue digging. He reasoned that once he had unearthed the entire tuber, he'd leave it there and carry home what was already in the basket. Later, he'd ask the villagers to come back and help him, and he'd divide up the giant tuber evenly among them. That was his decision, this hard-working, overly stubborn young man. But he still had a problem. "Whoa!" he exclaimed, when suddenly he realized that one of his feet was sticking into the air. He quickly gripped the tuber, looking down. This made no sense. "Oh my, there is nothing beneath me." He took a closer look and saw another bright blue sky, one that was not his own. The only thing visible near him was the tuber. "Where does this tuber grow to?" he asked. It was indeed a very long, very strange Tsao tuber. Yes, he was a man full of curiosity and stubbornness. He always wanted to explore and get to the very bottom of things. So, of course, he wanted to follow this tuber down into the new bright blue sky to see what was underneath. However, on the other hand, he told himself, "You have been away from home for 2 days." He was missing his parents, his beautiful wife, and his 2 lovely kids. They must have missed him, too. After further serious thinking, he decided to head home. He grabbed onto the tuber and began to climb up along it. Up and up he went until he was very tired and couldn't climb any farther, due, of course, to all the hard work he had put in over the last several days. Then he suddenly lost his grip on the tuber and proceeded to slide down and down. After who knew how long, he hit something that resulted in acute pain on his bottom, and he passed out. After some time, he wasn't sure how long, he woke up, probably the result of the extreme fragrance of something he smelled somewhere nearby. More amazing than the fragrance, at first, was what he saw. A group of children. No, it was a group of dwarfs who surrounded him. Each one stood motionless, staring at him wide-eyed, with some exhibiting signs of real anxiety. He stood up with considerable difficulty. His butt was still killing him, and let his nose lead him in the direction of the strong fragrance, which he could no longer resist. The dwarves followed him at a safe distance. However, because they were so short, the tallest one only came up to about his waist, they required several steps to each of his in order to keep up. Over time, the group of dwarves grew larger, and some now carried weapons, including 3-foot-long spears. They watched the young man carefully. Still following the direction of the fragrance, he stopped in front of a small thatch house. There he saw a group of female dwarfs steaming rice. How delicious the smell was, he thought. His hungry stomach began to make a grumbling noise, but because he was a mannered man, he wouldn't take anything from anyone else unless it was offered to him. Finally, he just sat down on the ground. The dwarves were relieved by his non-aggressive behavior and went about their business. Before long, he saw something quite strange. The dwarfs, surrounding a pot without a cover, leaned toward the steam and opened their mouths, then closed their mouths, then opened them over and over again. What on earth were they doing? When the steam from the open pot was gone, the dwarfs dispersed. The dwarfs didn't invite him to open his mouth for steam or anything else, so he endured the hunger he was experiencing. He took note of his surroundings. The sky looked the same as the sky at home. There were trees and flowers on the ground. However, the rice fields and gardens were very small. He walked around and was followed by the dwarfs wherever he went. He found some wild fruits and picked some to eat. He wouldn't touch any farm crops because he was a mannered man. He walked to a farm and noticed that there were no paddy rice fields, only dry ones, like the villagers at home used to grow as the first crop of the season. But wait a second, he thought to himself. The dwarf's rice was not smooth as he was accustomed to, but had a hairy structure on the grain. What kind of rice was this? He was also very surprised that the dwarfs grew few crops other than rice. It was getting dark, and he missed his family very much. Of course, he was not alone. The dwarfs, both adults and children, now felt comfortable enough to approach him, and did so tentatively, waving their hands, laughing and gibbering. Yes, the giant tuber was still there, but he was hungry and exhausted. He wouldn't have the energy to climb back up the tuber to reach home without a few days' rest. At night, the dwarfs slept inside their tiny houses, while the young man slept outside. The next morning, he observed them surrounding the rice steamer again. They opened their mouths as wide as they would go and breathed in deeply, just like they'd done the day before. After watching them for a while, he realized they didn't actually consume the rice, but simply inhaled the fragrant steam. After they were full, they walked away from the steamer. He took this opportunity to grab a handful of rice and stuff it into his mouth. "Ah!" he cried out. It was actually sticky rice, and was much more fragrant and tenderly chewy than the sticky rice at home. Those dwarfs were amazed, shocked, really, by the way he was eating it, and watched him wide-eyed while saying things to each other like "chi-chi-za-za," and other words that he did not understand in the slightest. At the moment, he couldn't have cared less what they thought about him. This was the most enjoyable rice meal he ever had had in his life. The rice was extremely delicious, a yam-free rice meal. At home, he wouldn't dare to eat so much rice without having a yam in it as filler. Well, he proceeded to eat so much that he needed to find a toilet. But since the dwarf's restrooms were too tiny for him to enter, he had no choice but to squat on the ground. The dwarves were curious as to what he was doing. Suddenly they yelled, "Whoa!" They had never seen such big poop. Theirs was about the size of rat poop. Because of the delicious steamed sticky rice, he decided without hesitation to stay and help the dwarves eat their rice. It would be a pity and a waste to throw away such yummy rice. He studied their behavior, made friends with them, and occasionally did some work for them. In their eyes, he was a good-hearted giant, a Hercules. He was very well liked, especially by the children who enjoyed climbing on him. A long time had passed, and again he began to sorely miss his home village, his parents, wife, and his 2 lovely kids. The dwarves wanted him to stay, but he insisted on leaving. By that time, they were harvesting the first rice crop of the year, so he grabbed a bunch of rice seeds to plant when he got home. But the dwarves forbade him from doing so. There was no resolving the conflict. Every time he tried to grab some rice seeds, the dwarves rushed him. Even though his body was much larger than theirs, he couldn't handle the discomfort caused by these small people who crawled over him like ants. Finally, he gave up, or pretended to. As a result, the dwarves stopped monitoring him. Later, while they weren't paying attention, he stole some rice seeds and put them in his pocket, inside his ears, and even up his butt, anywhere he could think of to hide them. Then he took off. He climbed up the Tsao and had gotten quite high by the time the dwarves discovered what he was up to. They yelled, "Voila, voila!" whatever that meant, at him from below. Some of them even attempted to climb the Tsao, but it was too big for them to hold on to, so they fell down to the ground without having gotten very far. As he was departing, climbing up and away from the dwarves and their upside-down sky, the young man cut off the Tsao beneath him to make sure the dwarves couldn't follow him. He followed the hole he'd dug before and climbed back up to the ground surface where he had begun his adventure. He removed from all his hiding places the sticky rice seeds he had stolen and wrapped them carefully with a taro leaf. He was delighted by this miraculous journey and pleased to have returned safely. Mostly, though, he was pleased to have successfully stolen the seeds of the fragrant sticky rice. He looked around the ground. His basket was still there. However, the Tsao he had dug up before was all rotten. He decided to dig some fresh Tsao and carry it home. His family members, seeing him return after having vanished for so many days, were delighted, as were the villagers. They all marveled at the story of his miraculous journey, and hearing about his eating so much fragrant, sticky steamed rice made their mouths water. He consoled them, though, saying, "Rest assured, I have stolen some seeds. Once I have harvested enough from them, I will share with you all, and you will all enjoy the fragrant, sticky steamed rice as much as I did."